Hi, I'm Mike Regan, Chief Innovation Officer at Fogarty Innovation. First off, I truly wish we were able to be in the same venue to have the opportunity to connect and to talk about our wonderful industry together. Unfortunately, as we all know, 2020 has thrown a monkey wrench into our lives, and as such, our true DNA, we are finding ways to overcome these obstacles. So I'd like to welcome you all to our virtual panel discussion, Funding the Medtech Startup Journey. 2020 has been a remarkable year, and that's just to say the least. We are still living with a global pandemic, the likes of which we haven't seen for over 100 years, unemployment hitting levels unheard of since the Great Depression, a looming recession, untamed wildfires in the West, destructive hurricanes in the South, even something called the derecho in Iowa. We're in the midst of a deep overdue societal reckoning, and it's been quite a year. But it's not over yet. We still have an election coming up in 2 weeks. As we look over the macro level landscape, we have seen a sharp recovery of the stock market. Silicon Valley Bank reports that healthcare venture capital fundraising is approaching 2019 record level settings. And they also state that the first half of 2020 produced the largest two-quarter investment total ever for venture-backed healthcare companies. Some segments are experiencing a remarkable share of these incoming dollars, while others are maybe a little bit less in favor. Even with these encouraging data points, there are still questions going forward. What will be the expected economic recovery, especially in the labor markets? How will COVID cases trend this winter? How will the elections affect the healthcare ecosystem? How fast will elective procedures bounce back? Within all these questions, most prominent to our audience is how will the medtech industry fare? Today, we'd like to explore the environment and discuss how it might affect medtech opportunities gaining the capital needed to successfully realize their plans. To accomplish this, we have gathered an outstanding panel of medtech investors. We will hear from these experts about their experiences, insights, and projections about the medtech investment environment. I'd like to have the pleasure of introducing our panel. It's a distinct honor and privilege to start out with Cynthia Eadie. Cynthia is a principal at Vensana Capital. She brings over a decade investing, operating, and public equities experience to Vensana. Prior to joining the firm, she served as a principal at Wyndham Venture Partners, where she led the firm's investments in Corteva Medical, Clara Vista Medical, Uspera Medical, and was previously an associate at NEA focused on investments in medical devices and healthcare services. She also gained operating experience as a director of business development and strategic marketing at Epix Therapeutics and medtech incubator D3DC. Cynthia began her career as an analyst at Piper Jaffray, where she focused on covering medtech devices, and in biotechnology at Pacific Growth Equities. She's a graduate of the University of California at Berkeley with a bachelor's in integrated biology and a bachelor's in business administration. So Cynthia, welcome to our panel, and thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Next, we have Dr. James Eadie. James joined Santé Ventures in 2009 and is an emergency medicine physician. Prior to joining Santé, James served in the United States Air Force and was a vice chair of emergency medicine at Wilford Hall Medical Center, an academic level 1 trauma center in San Antonio, Texas. He completed 2 tours in Iraq as a critical care transport team chief and emergency department commander before separating honorably as a major in 2008. Dr. Eadie, thank you very much for your service to our country. James is an oversight committee member for the University of Michigan's Translational Research and Commercialization Program, an early stage granting body for life science companies. He is also a mentor in the Coulter program at Michigan and a board member of Michigan Center for Integrated Research in Critical Care. James is board certified in emergency medicine and completed his residency at Massachusetts General Hospital and Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. He earned his medical degree from Harvard MIT program in health sciences and technology, his MBA from the University of Texas, and his BS in bioengineering, summa cum laude, from the University of Michigan. James, welcome to our panel, and thank you very much for your time. And finally, Susan Simpson. Susan has over 25 years experience in healthcare. She is a recognized visionary leader in the development and commercialization of new technologies. She has a proven track record of developing both products and companies from early stages through successful commercialization and growth in both medical device and pharmaceutical sectors, as well as startup and large companies. So she's spanned the spectrum in terms of the approaches she's taken. Susan currently serves as executive in residence at KCK Group's medical technology team, where she applies her expertise to their portfolio of commercial stage medtech companies and evaluates new investment opportunities. She previously served as Chief Strategy Officer at Intersect ENT, a publicly traded medical device company. As part of the founding team at Intersect, Susan played an instrumental role in the company's evolution from R&D stage to high growth commercial business. She led the company's transformation from a medical device approach to a pharmaceutical business as a general manager. Previously, Susan served as an executive at a startup company called Mitraline, designing and executing the company's clinical, marketing, and regulatory strategies. Her experience stems from many years at Guidant Corporation, where she was responsible for many of the top priority products. Susan holds a bachelor's degree in biomedical engineering from Marquette University in Wisconsin. So I really am very appreciative and honored to have such an esteemed group to talk about the landscape and how we are all doing as an industry. So I'd like to start out with our first question and direct this to Cynthia to begin with, is how has COVID changed your approach to investing?
I think, like everyone else, we've adapted to this new normal with Zoom and other sort of digital ways of staying connected with entrepreneurs, at least from an operational perspective. I think largely our process has been similar to before. We really rely heavily on our networks and sources. I think rely on sort of who we know and trust. One of the key factors, but that doesn't mean we won't consider companies. I think we're trying to think about and realize that this process might take a tad longer. And we have to be a little bit more deliberate in how we're thinking through how COVID might impact timelines, particularly when it comes to clinical studies or new product launches. But overall, we haven't really slowed down the pace of our investment. I think, there's always companies that need money and I think we also, you mentioned it's been a long time since we've all seen each other in person. And I think, especially with as many organic opportunities to, as we might normally have had in. So we find ourselves just reaching out to people more proactively or thinking, about specific therapeutic areas where we want to have exposure and reaching out to those companies in that space. So a lot of sort of white space mapping. And that's sort of how we're sort of investing in this environment. But I'd say, not much has changed.
Okay, thanks. James, how about you? Santé Ventures has been a very active investor in the medtech sector for quite some time. How is this changing the way that you look at opportunities?
Mike, I think we're sort of in the second phase of COVID right now. So early on, we really buckled down, wanted to work with our portfolio companies to try to figure out how we were going to ride out just March and April. And now that we're on, March day 225, we realize March is just never going to end. And we've pivoted, right? We've completed deals, so we're still actively investing, and we're cautiously optimistic that especially some of the earlier stage companies that are relying on, that are in the phases of engineering development, perhaps some early feasibility work, if you can get that done, that they can continue to evolve. Where we're taking some time at this point to sort of look ahead and think about it is, if this lasts for another 6 or 12 months from now, what are those implications? And will last 6 months of experience reflect what the next 6 to 12 months are gonna look like? If that's the case, then then it's going to continue to be robust. We'll continue to see lots of money into the space. We'll be able to finance You're going to see this IPO market that's open, which for Medtech has really not been open for a long time and it's robust at this point. That's a really rosy picture. On the other hand, winter may be coming. And if that's the case, what does that mean? What does that mean for clinical stage companies that are, pending first in human? We've got several that we thought, pre-COVID would be doing first in human, during 2020, and that's not happening. And we've got now plans for late 2020 or early 2021. But the announcements coming out of Europe right now, even this morning, waking up and finding out that Ireland and the Czech Republic are shutting down transportation again, are shutting borders. I don't know what that's going to mean for clinical trials, but it's probably not good. So we may see that, we may have those delayed. If we've got companies that are looking to enroll their IDE trials, they are enrolling, and that's stuff to pick up. But if not, and it really goes back to a slowdown, how does that impact? And so we're looking at that. We don't have a crystal ball that broke a long time ago, but we're trying to think through that. But overall, look, I mean, the global trends of why we like medical devices remain, right? There is an aging population with increasing comorbidities that need innovation to solve. And so we keep focused on that, but we are trying to be responsible to make sure that companies we have invested in, have the capital needed and the thought to move forward, and that we have the opportunity to find the next golden opportunities. And so we're still deploying and looking for those opportunities.
Great. Susan, with KCK, you're looking more towards commercial level companies as your investment hypothesis. What are you guys seeing in terms of your impact with COVID?
Yeah, you're right. As KCK invests exclusively in commercial stage companies. The valuations are based on forward-looking revenue. So going back early in the pandemic, maybe in the Tiger King / hoarding phase, which seems so long ago, we really paused on new investments, like James was saying too, just to really support the portfolio, but also because it's hard to, there's so much uncertainty about when procedures would return, and hence, adding uncertainty around pinning valuation on companies. And so some of the early risks, thankfully, we feel we've gotten through, which were, when would procedures be allowed again? When they are allowed, would physicians and patients be comfortable? Given the decline in, the increase in unemployment rates, and hence patients with insurance, would they be able to pay their out-of-pocket? If all those things came together, would there be enough personal protective gear? So I feel like, over the course of time, we've at least gotten out of the woods on some of those things, and we know that when procedures are allowed, patients and physicians will return to conducting them. So that's given us more confidence, and so hence we started to look at more opportunities and feel that, while there certainly will be some bumps with the pandemic, there's sustainability in procedure volume.
Great.
The other thing I'd say quickly is, I think from similar to what Cynthia is saying, from a diligence perspective, some things have changed and some things have even gotten better. I think a lot of our first calls and some of the early diligence used to be on conference calls. And now we've been forced into learning, and I think the technologies have advanced on Zoom. And so, now these are our face-to-face meetings. It's still, if you're going to invest in a company, it's still important to visit, to walk the halls, to get to know the team. But those now are not necessarily our face-to-face meetings. So a little ironic, but I think we'll keep that. I think Zoom will be something that we continue to use because it does offer more insight into those early meetings.
Great. So we see that COVID really has changed many of the processes, but some of the processes have stayed the same. One of the things that I think we're also seeing in our industry is the definition of what our industry truly is. So if we look at, traditional medtech, it used to be devices and diagnostics, but now we've got segments such as digital, we've got connected devices, we've got telehealth enablement. And so the definition of what constitutes opportunities is pretty broad. So how do you place your bets? I mean, given that there's so many different places to put your bets, what are some of the areas of interest that you see both in traditional and non-traditional medtech, and how do you handicap picking those? So James, would you lead us off on this, please?
So Mike, it's a fascinating time, right? I mean, telehealth, which has been kicking around for a long time, it's only been, the spark of COVID has ignited it and really opened it. Why? Well, I mean, people need it. They need to Zoom with their doctors because they can't travel there, but also because the regulatory bodies have changed, right? The payers have changed. And so we are looking at solutions that are utilizing telehealth or digital technologies to enable patient care and enable things that are already being done. But at the same point, and so we've got a company called Remedy, for example, that's doing this, where it's integrating clinical care with home visits, if need be, with digital technologies, with virtual visits, a physical place. COVID standing up, you can drive and see them, and you go through a line. But it's at its core, it's a technology-enabled service or program and company, and it couldn't exist without the technology aspect of it. So those are opportunities that we're looking for, where the technology can really enable care. Where I would say where the areas that we're intrigued by, but have still a little bit of caution, is with many of the monitoring ideas and many of just the digital technologies where they can give you a certain set of vital signs or feedback that it's less clear to us what you do with that. And the number of times I hear, hey, I'm going to collect this data and I'll give you this EKG and I'll tell you what their sats are, what their weight is. And as a physician, I look back and say, what am I supposed to do with it? And they say, well, I'm going to send it to the cloud and put AI to it, and it's going to have all this magic, and it's going to tell you, you'll be able to go and find out and look at it. And I said, walk a day in the footsteps of a primary care doc, and what you're going to realize is the last thing they want is more data. So if your solutions can actually reduce the amount of work or could automate things, now we're excited. But if it's just data for data's sake because you think that might be helpful, we're skeptical on those solutions. Those solutions may be great technologies that then fit within a broader spectrum, right? You may want to have a telehealth remote visiting that has some of these capabilities. But then is that a business model, or is that a product that is, that should be sold or partnered with a broader service delivery and business model?
Perfect. Susan, what do you guys think in terms of the broad section of opportunities, and how do you go ahead and try to pick from all those, given the pressure to perform?
Yeah, I'd say the majority of our investments have been in med device, and that's, I'd say, primarily what we see. But health tech, has been an area similarly that we're intrigued by. I think, telehealth, this is the push that was needed to force both providers and patients to really invest the time to become familiar with it and trust in it. And so, certainly we're interested in seeing technology similarly that helps support telehealth, especially if there's a positive economic impact. Through the rest of healthcare IT, I'd say if it's, healthcare with an IT angle, that feels of interest and aligns with our expertise. If it's more on the IT side with a healthcare angle, that feels less outside of our area of expertise, so we don't tend to look as much at those.
Okay. And Cynthia, does Vensana have a different view of opportunities, or are you similarly focused?
Yeah, I think like everyone else, we've been watching the shift and trend toward telehealth and remote monitoring for several years now. And, to James' point, COVID has really helped accelerate that adoption in conjunction with CMS coverage of televisits. I think it remains to be seen what becomes permanent, but I think we're not going to go backwards. So, overall, we like the concept of, telemedicine and connected devices, making it easier for patients to access care. But I think the key here is really understanding that business model, and really to what end those digital health apps or connected devices serve. And I think, additionally, you kind of have to think differently about those companies, because I think with devices, you have natural barriers to entry. And I think it's a bit different when it comes to a digital health play or something in AI. So you really have to understand what the competitive landscape is, whether that's, IP or some sort of network effect, and what that means for, capital requirements to scale and get an advantage. So it's just a really different process overall. But I think we are interested in this space and looking to make investments here.
So is there still room for traditional medtech in your portfolios, or is it the confluence of medtech with these new approaches? James, do you have kind of a view on that?
We still believe very strongly that traditional medtech has tremendous value. And I think that, over the last decade, we've seen a lot of the strategics focus on emerging markets. They've focused on consolidation, improving margins by consolidating and purchasing power, or contract negotiations with the hospital systems, for example. And we've seen as one group, right? You could think of that with some of the big, large acquisitions that have happened. And then you've got some of the other companies that have really focused on technology, and they have really taken off and really developed technology based on that. And interestingly, as you're seeing, now that some of the bigger companies have digested, perhaps, and integrated those larger acquisitions, they've pivoted back towards more technology focused. So we look at this and think that digital is just part of the technologies. If it makes sense, it gets added. It's there, but it comes back to what problem are you solving? Right? I don't care if it's electrical, if it's a mechanical device, if it's got chips involved in it. What is the problem you're solving? How are you solving it? That's what matters. And I think that if you can do that and address a large unmet need and provide it with an elegant, simple solution, there is ample opportunity for that technology to really take hold and change patients' care and patients' life.
It makes a lot of sense. So, Susan, as you look at these new type of opportunities, is the risk assessment different in terms of the type of risk you want to retire early than traditional, or are they still very similar in terms of how you handicap what you need to get addressed early on?
No, I actually feel like it's that part hasn't changed. It really comes down to the same fundamentals of the business. Mm-hmm. Yes, there is maybe some near-term, there is near-term uncertainty, especially for the next year. But when it comes down to looking at new investments, we're still concentrated, again, on the same fundamentals, on the strength of the team, on the foundation of the company. And I feel that we're approaching it similarly. One thing that I know that we're watching closely too are the breakthrough designated companies. Certainly an accelerated FDA path is beneficial, but I think one of the potential upsides is how we start to see how reimbursement is impacted for some of those technologies that work through it. And so, yeah, similar to what James shared, I think there's, healthcare strong, and I think part of the reasons that the markets have been so supportive of it continued through 2020, is that, yeah, there might be bumps, but, our patients and still need healthcare, and that will be sustained.
Okay. And Cynthia, do some of these new opportunities encourage earlier investment, or is it still kind of the hypothesis is similar to what you do in terms of the traditional approach to investing?
Yeah, I think when you say new opportunities, I assume you mean within digital health and telehealth.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think, at least for us, we are traditional device investors, and so we're not as comfortable investing in digital health and telemedicine. So with respect to Vensana, we do tend to look at companies that are a bit later stage or that sort of straddle the connected device and telehealth service in areas where we understand the market and how that care is delivered. Because if you're trying to change the care pathway, I think that's where we really want to understand what that means, how you shift behavior, and the factors behind those changes in behavior, whether it's something that's on a macro level like COVID changing consumer behavior, or something from a regulatory standpoint or reimbursement standpoint that could shift behavior. And it comes both from the patient side as well as physicians. How are they going to be compensated differently? And so I think understanding all the elements that go into early stage investing in digital health, we tend to like to go later to hope to see that they have some sort of traction or proof of concept in development, particularly since there are lower barriers to entry. It's hard to sort of pick who those winners are going to be.
Great. So Susan, you've recently been an operator and know what it's like to be on the other side of trying to raise money. What advice do you have for CEOs trying to weather the storm, and how do they pursue their funding strategy given the backdrop we've been discussing so far?
Yeah, it's certainly not been easy raising money in 2020. We've had 3 companies close rounds amidst the pandemic: Reflection, Aaron, NeuroPace. And it certainly took significant effort and more time, as I think Cynthia referenced earlier, that you need to allocate more time to the process for folks to get their arms around the uncertainty and then agree on what valuation is representative for that company, despite some of the, especially next year's uncertainty. But certainly, as you mentioned earlier, from the SVB data, it shows there's still appetite to invest. There's still acquisition. The IPO markets are still open. And then, we really concentrate on companies with the potential to remain standalone businesses. So, we're watching the public markets and have seen the continued acceptance for medical device companies, and then certainly health tech, which has grown, and pharma. But I'd say one of the trends we're also watching closely this year has been on the preponderance of SPACs, or special purpose acquisition corporations, that have gone public. And I think, especially again, since we invest in businesses that are not just product companies that are truly set up for growth and to be standalone businesses. We think it's a potential, while we're watching with some skepticism because it's early, we think this is a really exciting route for those companies to gain funding while remaining relatively standalone, even though they're quote unquote acquired, but have the cash for continued growth. So I think that's been an exciting trend to watch this year. Again, it's early, but something we're paying attention to.
Great. Cynthia, same question to you. What would you advise to CEOs trying to navigate the investment environment today?
I mean, I think I always tell them, start early and speak to everyone you can. I think it takes much longer to get to a close because even now I'm thinking specifically of a company that came to us, or multiple companies oftentimes, and they say, hey, we'd like to close in 45 days, and we've never met this team before. And I just think it becomes really, really difficult to execute. And I think, even if you're not raising money and you don't need capital, until a year from now, it's always helpful to sort of get those introductions and talk to people and show new investors that you've been executing on plan. So I always say that's my number one advice. And then particularly in this challenging time where you could be faced with delays on the clinical side or the commercial side, making sure you raise enough capital with the right partners that share your vision for the company, I think is really key. And I would, be more flexible on what that means in terms of valuation in terms. I think having the right board and investor partner is really critical, particularly if things get tough.
Great. And James, finally for you, the same type of question. Any additional insights in terms of your recommendations?
Just two that come to mind, Mike. I agree completely with what Cynthia and Susan have said. Network matters, right? So spend your time as you're networking to make those introductions. We don't have, unfortunately, the opportunity to bump into you today after this talk, right? I'm not going to be out having coffee, at least, I won't bump into anybody in my kitchen, but we don't have that time. I won't be able to bump into you at the bar and be able to talk and say, wow, that's really fascinating. Let me see that picture on your cell phone. Oh, that's interesting. Here's my card. So you missed that. And as much as we say, hey, we'll talk and we'll interact, it's a big difference if somebody picks up the phone and calls and says, James, listen, we worked together before and I saw this technology and it's really impressive, right? And can explain why. So those warm introductions today, as we enter into the winter, warm introductions are going to be really important to overcome this cold period. The second thing is adaptability, right? Tell a story of why investing today in your technology makes sense, right? Is it because, look, you're an early stage technology and the other technologies out there are held up, right? You're going to be able to use this COVID winter to accelerate R&D in your shop, and others are going to be that were potentially ahead of you or stalled because they can't get into the clinic. Or look, you've been able to do tele monitoring for first in human. I thought of a company, they're like, look, we figured out a way to be able to get in the room and we're shipping and doing engineering trainings and we don't have to be there. And we've got a site that's actually enrolling now. Wow, you got a site that's enrolling and you figured out how to do this remotely and it's successful. You got my attention. How do you tell a story and how do you think through the next 6 or 12 months so that when the investor looks and thinks about where he or she can place their next investment, that they're placing in with a team, in a technology and an opportunity that's going to gain value rather than just tread water, right? I mean, that's a whole different story. If you're trying to come out and say, look, we're trying to extend the round and this is an opportunity, that may be the story. But if you're really pushing it, figure out how you tell a story about why today your opportunity is special in COVID. And what's embedded in that is you may need to change your story, right? Your plan may need to change. Your plan of launching, a US IDE in 3 months or 6 months from now is probably impractical if you haven't gotten it already launched and you already have it. So, raising $30, $40 million to run your PMA trial right now maybe that's not the right answer. So how do you think through these and how do you come up with contingency plans? That's what we're looking for. How to be creative, how to think through it, how to drive value and make the most of the time. But if it's a new investor versus an old investor, you got to give them the carrot of why today makes a lot of sense for you.
Perfect. Well, so we've covered a lot of ground here today. Really appreciate each of you. What I'd like to do is give each of you kind of a couple minutes just to give your thoughts or a recap of how you're feeling and about the future of our industry. So Cynthia, can I start out with you just kind of for a recap of your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've honestly never been more bullish on medtech in the last 15 years of I think you've got a collaborative FDA, really positive CMS policies on breakthrough therapy coverage, of the inpatient list, only list, a lot of sort of positive reimbursement tailwinds for this sector. And I think, as everyone else mentioned, that, there's a lot of new sources of capital, public markets becoming a viable exit option for companies. I think I'm very bullish on medtech as a investment sector.
Fantastic. James, final thoughts from you?
If you told me, back in March that we would be sitting at markets of all-time highs, Medtech's having their best IPOs since probably the 90s, that we'd be having these conferences virtually and thinking that we probably are not getting together, for at least until next summer. And I would feel this excited about MedTech, I would tell you you were out, in left field, you're smoking crack or something, because that's, it was impossible. So I think it's a testament to the perseverance, to the patients we're serving, to the tenacity of our entrepreneurs, that we're where we're at, and we've got a long way to go. But I am more I feel like the opportunities in front of us are great, and so I say, we gotta take it forward and play it step by step. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for MedTech, right? The patients, the populations, the demographics are all there. The needs are really there. And while COVID is making it more difficult, look, I've gotten used to working at home, and I never thought I would. I never thought I would be on a Zoom call, or now having calls that are phone calls and saying, geez, why aren't we on Zoom? So we're adapting, and that's what early stage companies do. They do best. And so I think we just keep it up, and the economic markets, the funds that are out there have raised funds. The capital is still there. If you look back when 2009, coming out of that time and thinking about going to meetings back in 11 and 12, that was really sobering times. That we're not there, and I really hope we don't get back to those times. So I think, Mike, with you leading things like this, and the MedTech Strategist putting together these opportunities, we're gonna get through this, and our patients will be better for it.
Perfect, thank you. And Susan, your thoughts?
Yeah, similarly, bullish on MedTech in general. Despite the serious consequences of this pandemic, it's the type of situation that our healthcare innovation community is really built for. And I think, we've seen such, there's probably less pivot in how we go about investing or looking at investments than really what's exciting is, the companies and the new crazy ideas that are not only being contemplated, but also made into reality. And that's what we're seeing here, and the way technologies and entrepreneurs and innovators are triggered to think about working through something like this, I think is going to be a really beneficial part of our new normal. There's, I think the way, as been mentioned here, the way we do business is different. Getting on Zoom calls similarly, never thought that would be part of the day-to-day. I am looking forward to going back to the office. My office mate is now my dog, and that's, there's some nice things to that, but I miss being in the office with my colleagues. So looking forward to some of what we experienced before, but really excited for the changes in healthcare, the new ideas, and how we'll work more efficiently in the future.
I really appreciate the look that I'm hearing from each of you, and that the optimism is still there. I've been in the industry for closer to 40 years now than not, which scares the daylights out of me. But I think the part that is always held true is what we're doing is important, what we're doing matters, and what we're doing people are counting on. So irrespective of what the obstacles are in the way of getting to those goals, we'll find a way to address those. So I really appreciate your time and your effort today in being able to convey that to our audience, and for all the effort that you put into trying to find ways to continue to help fund these opportunities. So Cynthia, James, and Susan, it's been a pleasure and an honor to talk with you today, and really appreciate all you've done. Thank you very much.